right, hello and welcome to another episode of A Fresh Perspective with Jeff Charles, with your boy, Jeff Charles, your favorite conservatarian contrarian, where we prefer, you know what we prefer. We prefer truth over narrative and principles over politics. And I've got another fire guest for you today. This is gonna be a topic that I don't really talk about that often. Maybe a little bit controversial, given the times that we're in, but I think it's going to be good, and it's a much needed conversation, especially since everything is about race nowadays, right? But before we go into all that, before I bring my guest on, who I think you're going to love, remember to like this video, share this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, which you should have been subscribed. Come on, what are you doing with your life? Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. I'm watching you. And that way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new interview, which I do every week on Wednesdays and Fridays at 7 o'clock Eastern. Also, check out my audio-only podcast. I'm going to be getting back on that. I've got some good stuff coming. As always, you can read my stuff at redstate.com and at libertynation.com. Follow me on Twitter at jeffontheright if you don't already follow me. I'm very entertaining. So check me out. If you want to support my work, you can do so in the show notes below. I've got all the apps, the CashApp, PayPal app, Venmo, all that stuff. It helps me quite immensely to bring you this wonderful content. So without further ado, I want to bring on my guest, Mr. Devon Westhill, who is the president of the Center for Equal Opportunity. And we're going to talk about some awesome stuff today. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing great, man. It's awesome to be with you.
I'm glad to have you. We're going to be talking about affirmative action. Dun, dun, dun. I think you have some pretty good insights on that. It's a subject that I don't have a very vast knowledge about, but I'm pretty familiar with what it is. I'm just probably more about as much as the next guy. But before we get into all of that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, Devon?
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to do that. I need to follow your podcast, and I need to follow you on YouTube as well, as you were just suggesting, because
yes,
you've got some really, I'm just giving you a plug there. You've got some really fantastic content. And one of the things that I saw recently was with Charles Love, whose podcast I appeared on a few weeks ago after a conference we were both at, and it was a fantastic experience. But you've had him on. I saw that interview, and I remember you saying that they're trying to cancel Steve Martin because of a jerk and, being born a poor black child, those statements and everything else or whatever. And Mr. Love doesn't really, doesn't describe himself that way, but I describe myself that way. I was born a poor black child. And I love that statement. Now, I'm not the type of person that says it was never easy for me. He continues on in the joke, but I was born a poor black child. To a white mother and a black father. All of my life, I've not known my father. But me, my brother, and my sister grew up in the South and great state of Florida, where you and I both live now. And things were rough kind of growing up in a number of different respects. I write about some of that experience and try to make meaningful connections to problems in the Black community and really importantly, in poor communities, no matter the skin color of people all around the United States, in my writing and my speaking. But I somehow got out of that. I've got some thoughts on that. I went to the Navy, which changed my life in a lot of different ways, as it does most people who serve. Went and got an education after I left, undergraduate degree at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Then went back home to get my law degree at the University of Florida. Long story short, served in the Trump administration, have been a nonprofit executive, and have also been a criminal trial lawyer in private practice. And now I'm here with you, and this is the height of my professional career to be on your podcast.
Yeah, nobody believes that. You served in the Trump administration. By the way, what did you do in the Trump administration?
So I started out in the Labor Department, basically being the chief outreach person for administrative law scholars, the nonprofit law and policy community, because I come from what's called the Federalist Society, where for several years Yeah, for several years, it's kind of a lawyers debating group. And for several years, I was building a project there that looked at regulation, where it causes harm, sometimes for innovation, for upward mobility, and the like. And so I was deeply entrenched in the nonprofit community on the right that were thinking critically about difficult, ideas, and I knew a lot of people. So I came in to work with Alex Acosta, the Secretary of Labor at the time, and then for Gene Scalia, one of the late Justice Antonin Scalia's sons, succeeded Alex Acosta as secretary, being the chief outreach person to those communities, making sure that the policy that we were developing was ironclad, that it really made a lot of sense, and that it was going to uplift American workers. And I ended my time in the Trump administration serving for about a year as a top civil rights official at the Agriculture Department with Sonny Perdue, Secretary Sonny Perdue.
Okay, cool. So now, I mean, affirmative action, I mean, that's obviously a topic that you're very familiar with and seem to be passionate about. Before we get into the actual meat of that, can you kind of walk me through how you even got into discussing this topic? Like, what was it about this topic that attracted you so much?
Yeah, I think if I'm being totally honest here, what got me interested in this was just being intellectually curious about difficult issues and doing my own reading. I've learned more sort of in my own personal life than I ever learned in formal education. I'm pretty formally educated, but just in my own life, reading books, reading articles, being interested in contrarian views on things, and really getting to the bottom of why things are controversial, whether what we're hearing, right, the narratives are actually really true. But it just so happens also, so I learned about mismatch theory by reading on my own, and we'll talk a little bit about that, I'm sure. But it just so happens that it coincided with my career. So I started as a criminal trial lawyer, as I suggested, after I graduated from law school, passing the bar, et cetera. But then I was drawn into this nonprofit sort of conservative legal community, and people were saying things. So they had ideas that I'd never heard about before. And it really, this particular one really piqued my interest, affirmative action, race relations stuff, because a lot of people who were talking about them, left or right, no matter what, don't really have didn't have the upbringing that I have, didn't think necessarily the same. Don't have the lived experience that I have, and whether or not that is helpful in explaining why some ideas are better than others. And I just ended up sort of working in civil rights over the course of my career so far. And then I took over an organization, the Center for Equal Opportunity, that has been pushing back against the narrative that affirmative action, which is race preferences for people of preferred races in various respects, not just in higher education, but in hiring, contracting, and so forth, pushing back against the narrative that is a total benefit for those communities, which it is not.
Gotcha. So before we get into the cons of affirmative action, what would proponents of affirmative action say are the benefits? I mean, it seems kind of like an obvious question, but the answer may not be quite as obvious as we think it is. So the people who support the idea of affirmative action, what do they think the benefits of it are, or what good has it done?
Yeah, well, what I can say is sort of what I've heard, because I'm not a benefit or an individual who thinks that it's all that beneficial. One thing, legally speaking, and that has really taken off since the late 1970s in legal circles and otherwise, because it's basically the foundation legally for why you're able to do what is essentially discrimination on the basis of race, when there are laws in this country, including the Constitution, that demand that you treat people equally under the law, notwithstanding what their race is, what their ethnicity is. The reason is diversity, that it is a compelling state interest in having different skin colors, basically on campuses, and that really is the only carve out for sort of what I again call sort of race discrimination. That this diversity, the educational benefits that flow from it are really, really beneficial in a number of different ways. A lot of those I don't think have been well articulated, and I think it's sort of easy to attack as something that's not really genuine. What proponents, by and large, of affirmative action want to do is to promote certain races and ethnicities in this country who have been traditionally marginalized, oppressed, et cetera, which is all very true. But the question is whether or not this is the right way to do it, and also, if we're being honest, that we should be saying that too. Like we really are trying to atone for some sins that we see on display, and some of the disparities that have been intergenerational now in Black and Brown communities in terms of socioeconomic achievement, educational income achievement, and so on and so forth. That I think is by and large what the real reason behind race preferences is. There should be more doctors, for example, in this country who are Black that reflects the general makeup of the population of Black people. There's no reason, right, why, except for racism or historic things like slavery and Jim Crow and so on and so forth, why there wouldn't be 13% of the population who are doctors, why there wouldn't be 13% of the population who are engineers, et cetera, et cetera. People really believe that, but it's couched, legally speaking, because this is the only way you can get past our laws so far, and diversity is a really important thing, and we are willing to do this sort of race discrimination to make diversity more robust in our institutions.
Okay, that makes sense, and that's basically what I've heard too. I mean, when it comes from the diversity angle, and also acknowledging like the historical issues that shaped the way things are today. And it's interesting because most people agree on that. I mean, nobody denies that history happened. But it's very interesting to me, Devon, because when I read about certain issues that are race related, it's like a foregone conclusion that affirmative action is only positive. And if you're against affirmative action, you are automatically anti-Black or anti-Hispanic, because the only way to close those gaps, or maybe not the only way, but affirmative action is supposedly proven to work and to close those disparities. It's like it's not even questioned. So like when they talk about Republicans or even Black conservatives who like yourself may have may not be a proponent of affirmative action, it's like it's so ingrained in their thinking that they're going to look at you askance, like, what, are you don't want to see Black people succeed? Why do you think that is?
Well, it's a good way of attacking your opponent, who's making a good argument, right? To say that person's a racist, or that person really doesn't, is an idiot, doesn't know what they're talking about, right? Because we all know, this is a really good thing. So it's a good way of attacking your opponent. But I also think there's an element of vulnerability, right? They understand that their argument probably isn't as strong as we've come to believe. That there is, all benefit, no burden here on those with whom we're trying most to help, right? Black and brown folks. We, make a connection. I know you've been out in the public talking about this, and a lot of other folks as well. Make a connection to Justice Clarence Thomas, for example, who has been basically all of his professional life opposed to affirmative action for all of the negatives that go into this. And he's attacked based on his skin color and not thinking the right way. Recently on Twitter, for example, I just got on Twitter last year. It's probably a bad idea that I'm on Twitter, but I'm on there. And I recently saw that Uncle Clarence was trending on Twitter, which it makes me sick to my stomach when I see stuff like that. I wrote a piece on this early last year when Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina gave the Republican response to a speech by President Biden. And right afterward, when he said, America's great, it's not this racist country that the left is portraying it as, and so on and so forth, he was labeled as Uncle Tim. That started trending on Twitter. Now, I changed my view there on that particular subject from, this is basically a slur that Black people use against Black people. And that's really what it was when I was growing up. You would use it against Black people, use it against other Black people.
Yes.
It's still happening, but I do think it's increasingly something that progressive, extreme, radical, progressive left whites are given permission to use against conservative Black people now as well. That's the one thing I would change from my perspective last year with Tim Scott. But it's an easy way to attack your opponent and score some cheap, some cheap, I don't know, political points is the right term, but to not be able, not to put forward an affirmative argument for why race preferences is actually a boon for the population that you're trying to purportedly help.
Yeah, I agree. And I think more and more people are they're starting to realize what people like you and I have always known. Their arguments do not stand up to scrutiny. So they have to keep their opponents on the defensive because they can't defend what they're saying. And I'm not going to digress too much on Clarence Thomas, but what that really exposed to me is how the Black Democratic elites responded. They didn't respond at all. They allowed these white progressives to use racial slurs to attack a Black man. And to me, it's like, if you don't really believe the stuff that you say, because the way to tell if somebody actually believes it is when they apply it when it's not convenient. So if somebody from their side says something that's clearly racist, even though you would disagree with the person who was used against, you're still going to call that out. And they didn't, which is telling to me. They don't believe the stuff that they say. They're just there to, whether it's to get a check or whether it's to get clout or all those things, they're not really fighting for anything. They're fighting for themselves. That's the way I take it anyway.
Yeah, no, I think your take is very similar to mine, which is why I wanted to make that connection, because I think it helps the conversation here when you're talking about affirmative action and why the ideas that I hold and that I think a lot of people hold in conservative legal communities, in conservative communities in general on this point, hold those. The other side is disingenuous about the arguments, the reasoning that they're putting forward a lot of times. But there are good faith folks on the left as well who I think by and large just haven't been exposed to some of the ideas in terms of why it's actually negative, why on balance it's the costs outweigh the benefits.
So let's get into it then. So what would you say have been the worst consequences of affirmative action for the Black community?
For the Black community, two things I'll say. When we were talking about the worst, right? There are a lot of that. The worst. One is there are serious problems with socioeconomic achievement in the Black community. The statistics are right. I mean, you can't argue with the numbers here. On average, Blacks are lagging way behind, oftentimes, other racial and ethnic groups, particularly whites and Asians. And what affirmative action does is it papers over the real root causes of that with fancy graphs and wonderful statistics about the amount of Black and brown people who have entered the university this year through affirmative action programs and what have you. When we really need to be looking at family structure, which is in my mind one of the biggest root causes of the gaps that we see between achievement between Blacks and other races. It papers over the issue that by and large, on average, Black people are getting a subpar education. Black children are getting a subpar education compared to other races in this country. It papers over all of that. It makes it appear as though Black people and brown people are doing better. So I think that is a huge thing. If we got rid of affirmative action, that fig leaf that's worn to cover up those root problems that are much more difficult to solve. Don't get me wrong, but it would shine a light on those things, and something would have to be done. People would demand action on those things. Affirmative action covers it up. Secondly, I mentioned mismatch theory, and here's the other big kicker. Affirmative action is doing nothing to close those gaps in achievement, or very little. May actually be widening those gaps. What mismatch theory is this idea that people who are given massive preferences based on basically any other reason other than academic preparation and merit, are being placed within an environment they're not academically prepared for. What follows from that? And when it's by and large Black and brown people who get these preferences, which are very, very large. And my organization has studied this for a long period of time. We put out a lot of studies about this. When you get those sorts of preferences, you don't keep up academically. That should be clear. It goes almost without saying if you really think about it. That you can't keep up academically. That you see yourself struggle. Others see you struggle. It perpetuates some really negative stereotypes about Black and brown people. That they are actually, not as smart as everybody else, right? They're actually probably lazy too, right? I've seen the guys. They're struggling. They must not be studying as much. They must just not be as smart either. The answer though is that they weren't actually prepared to be in a more advanced cohort of students who are being taught at a higher level because they are more academically prepared. So you're putting this person into a place where they cannot succeed. What happens then also is that, and the statistics bear this out, if one is willing to look for it, Black and brown people disproportionately take longer to graduate, who get these massive preferences. They are much more likely to drop out from their studies, from school, totally, or to schools. And finally, and this gets to my main point, I know I'm long-winded, they are more likely, disproportionately, to change their major from a hard science like physics, technology, engineering, mathematics, to sociology.
You said more likely or less likely?
Disproportionately more likely than other races, or I should say students who don't get those massive preferences, to change their major away from those hard disciplines that they're interested in studying, STEM sort of disciplines, sociology, English literature, et cetera. They end up with a degree in those fields when they would have been I shouldn't say perfectly, if they would have been matched academically at the start with the right institution, with the right cohort of students, I think it's undeniable that we'd have more Black doctors, more Black engineers, more Black academicians, et cetera, if they had not been placed in a position where they felt like they needed to change their major to survive. So
why is that though? But okay, so why is it? Because sociology was perceived as easier than STEM fields, which it probably is. Is that why they're changing their majors?
I think that's right. Or you need less sort of academic preparation or runway to be prepared at certain institutions to jump into the physics field at a higher level than you do for English literature.
I see. So you need like less of a foundation in order to build up to that for the softer sciences. Precisely.
Yeah. And you're in a cohort with other students who, especially at the high level, think about an MIT or something. You get a big bump because you're Black, but not academically prepared to be with other students who don't get a bump, who get in totally on merit, who have been at MIT eating, breathing, sleeping, science, mathematics, and so forth all their lives. They've gone to special programs. They're national merit scholars on these topics and so on and so forth. The professors are teaching at this level for those sorts of students. You've got a big learning curve to get there. It's iterative, right? In these sorts of disciplines. English literature, not so much. Sociology, you could come in having, basically just your high school diploma, bright student, whatever, and sort of get in and do well in sociology, do well in English lit, or what have you. Not the same with hard sciences. which these students otherwise wanted to study, wanted to become engineers, and would have had a much stronger chance if they had been paired with an institution and with a cohort of students that they were, by and large prepared for and on merit qualified for.
I was having a conversation a couple months ago with Kay Heimowitz. I believe she's with the Manhattan Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And she brought up a story where there was a more than one student. There was a group of students, Black students, who had graduated high school in Detroit. And then they went to community college and they weren't able to keep up. So they were getting and they graduated with high marks and honors, but they weren't able to keep up. They ended up suing the city because they weren't prepared enough to prepare them for community college, even despite graduating with honors. So I'm going to ask a question that, again, the answer seems obvious, but I want your take on it. You mentioned the quality of education that a lot of Black and Latino students get, and really low income in general. I mean, because you can be white and low income and you're probably still getting the same level of education. Why is there such a disparity there between the quality of education, where people are graduating and they're not even prepared to go to a community college?
I'm not an education expert. So this is me waxing poetic to some extent. On the one hand, I just don't have the answer. Some of it, I think, does stem from basically just where we're putting resources, where we're prioritizing money, where instructors want to teach, where they want to live, where they want to be, the students they want to engage with. All those things are part of the problem. An education expert on this topic like Kay is going to be much better than me to answer the question. Mm-hmm. My area of expertise is another one area that's a problem increasingly in this country, and that is dumbing down standards. It's probably better way I can put that or whatever. But it's this push for racial equity in the country, social justice, that says, look, one of the ways in which we change or close the gaps in economic or educational attainment of Black and brown kids is to make the standards lower, and that will help them to get by. But, on the surface, just like affirmative action, looks great, right? Wow, I got into MIT or some other institution or whatever by the skin of my teeth. I really was not academically qualified, but man, wow, look at this great achievement. Wait a second, that's only the start, right? There's so much more that goes into that calculus, right? You got into the institution, that's fantastic. Now you have to really prove yourself, and that proves to be kind of difficult. But we're seeing that increasingly math is considered teaching at 2 + 2 = 4 racist, right? And when we're toying with those sorts of things, we're not holding Black and brown students to the same level of excellence as we do white students. It is this incredible sort of soft bigotry of low expectations that has ripple effects, right? They end up going to a community college and being totally unprepared because, they were not allowed to get below a 50% on any assignment. They were not held to the standard that 2 + 2 = 4. They're allowed to, like I'm doing right now, wax poetic about whatever their thoughts are on math. And that is.
Yeah. Well, what's your opinion on 2 + 2 = 4?
My thinking is that it has always, and it continues to equal 4. 2 + 2 = 4. I wrote a piece a little while ago, I think last year, on this same topic. It also has an added effect, which I experienced growing up in all Black communities. Nobody in any community I grew up in when I was a kid, I don't remember anyone being non-Black. Everybody was Black except for my mom, who was white. And one of the things that was perpetuated in those communities was that if you try to achieve academically, that you're acting white. Right. And it just pushes that narrative to the extreme, right? It's bad enough that we're already in our communities suggesting something like that, which is highly damaging. But when white progressive elites and Black progressive elites and other people where poor Black communities are getting their information, are people who they trust, and so on and so forth, are saying the exact same thing.
You took the words right out of my mouth. Yeah.
You're not going to succeed. You're not only going to continue to push that narrative, but then you're also saying we're going to institutionalize it. We're going to make sure that you don't succeed for your own good.
See, and that's the scary part right there, right? I mean, you've got these black and white progressives affirming the idea that, say, critical thinking or rational or linear thinking is part of whiteness, or striving for better is part of whiteness. Hard work is part of whiteness. So they're taking what a lot of Black children hear as kids and they're enshrining that when they're adults. And now they're trying to make it into public policy. I mean, you've got Robin DiAngelo, who, I got to give it to her, race is a good grift and she's grifting it good. She puts forth those ideas too, which if you were to ask Richard Spencer or David Duke what he thinks of what she's saying, he would agree 100%. And they don't see it. It drives me crazy. So I'm glad that you brought that up. But getting back to what we were talking about as far as like mismatch theory, I hadn't even heard that term until you brought it up, but I've heard of what you're talking about how they get into these colleges and they're not prepared. In your op-ed that you wrote for the Washington Times, you came out of the gate with the statistic and it floored me. You said Black students, let me see, are 250% less likely to graduate college. What's happening? Why is that?
Public colleges, I think, is where the statistic comes from. Again, I'm not 100% sure about that. I cite that as sort of a foundational point in trying to make a bigger argument to defend my thesis, and that is that. Maybe I have some thoughts on why that's the case, but notwithstanding, that is the reality that we're living in. And the question is, in the piece that you're referencing, what do we do about it? I think it's really important that we identify what the problem is before we try to start throwing solutions and so forth. But what I wanted to do was in that piece and in speaking engagement that spurred it, talk about why I'm where I am today. Now, I kind of, and why other people who kind of grew up, in rough environments and so forth, ended up being successful in one way or the other. I think that is probably more illuminating than studying failure. A lot of folks want to point to failure and suggest, well, that is where we find the solution. Let's fix that failure. Well, wait a second. There are some people who blew past those sorts of things. And is there something there in those stories that can be said to close the gap that 250% Blacks are 250% less likely to graduate than whites at certain institutions. Now, again, if I think about some of the root causes, a lot of it's going to be some of the stuff that I've mentioned already, not least of which ensuring that there's a nuclear family that are raising these Black children. There's a mother and a father. I'm not opposed to two mothers or two fathers, but the sort of environment where these kids are more likely to be able to succeed, that they are not going to need massive preferences to get into schools and then fail. They're going to have loving parents that push them to excellence, who are not going to say, well, don't worry, it's okay to get C's. You'll get by, and it really is the patriarchy or the white supremacy that is holding you back and so forth. So don't worry about getting the B's and the A's. No, those very strong family units have always, and still to this day do, so long as they exist, push their children to excellence. They invest their time and their energy into making sure that those children are going to be prepared. That's one of the foundational problems, I think, and I don't think I even need to say that the breakdown of the Black family has been one of the great scandals in this country for a long period of time, for a lot of the reasons that you know about, from expansion of the welfare state and on. I think at this point, a two-parent household, or I should say fatherless households in the Black community, are some like 70% plus or something. Vast majority of households do not have a father in it, and that is one of the major problems and why they're not getting pushed to excellence. The schools are broken. They're increasingly pushing soft bigotry of low expectations, and the kids show up totally unprepared for the coursework. It's only fueled by, let's give them at the 11th hour, let's give them a big bump so they can get into school and fail. Do poorly. That's not helpful.
Yeah, and with that answer, you can almost see why some prefer to just say, oh, the problem is racism and we have to use affirmative action to fix it. Because if fatherless homes and broken homes are a prime or the prime contributor to this, that's tougher to fix, and you can't fix it with government. I mean, the government can help break down the family, which it has, but the only thing that the government can do to fix it is to stop doing what it was doing to break up the family. They can't make people stay together, right? I mean, I know they can offer certain incentives and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, government can't fix that problem.
It's almost intractable, and we've been dealing with it for several generations now, the breakdown of the Black family, and it doesn't matter what the race of a person is. If you don't have that family unit, if you don't have the father in the home and so forth, you're going to have these sorts of pipeline issues in any population. I almost wrote in that piece that you referenced that until we're able to shackle men to the household legally, we have to look at some other ways in which we might be able to solve these problems. I still think the biggest issue is fatherless homes, or not having sort of that strong family unit, as I suggested. But until we can do that legally, as you suggested, the government can't yet do. We'll I don't know, maybe the Biden administration will help us. They forced a lot of other things on us. Really. Maybe we should be looking at some other things that might help, because I come from a fatherless home, but still I'm able to achieve some of the things I've achieved.
That's true.
When neither one of my siblings sort of went that path. They went sort of the cycle of destruction path. And what was it that was different about me? I didn't have a father. So putting that aside, what can be done? What can we promote? How can we help the Black community begin to close those gaps that we've seen for generations now?
Yeah, and I guess that would be my next question. I mean, what are some other ways? I mean, obviously, like you said, you can't, the government can't enforce, family and throw people in jail for not doing it, right? I will say this. I mean, from what I'm seeing, I do think, especially among younger generations, I'm seeing a lot of younger Black people talking about how they want to actually raise family, marry one person, have kids with one person, and hopefully that grows more, and maybe that in the future, hopefully that will help. I mean, I do know that the rate of fatherlessness in the Black community went down a little bit over this last census period. Hopefully that continues. I don't know if it will or not, but what are some other things? I mean, because one of the things that you talk about is sending kids to schools that are more of a proper fit. Like you brought up MIT, but if you're a Black person getting into MIT because of affirmative action, now we've got that mismatch theory going on. So are there possible solutions or stopgap measures that could possibly help with that issue, or what do you think?
I'm not exactly sure what the policy answer is. Maybe we'll tease it out just talking about it now. But one thing I did want to comment on, we're seeing more Black people saying they want to raise, Black men particularly want to be involved in their families and those sorts of things. I think that's happening in part because the proliferation of social media and the ability to hear new ideas about things and so forth. We're hearing from a lot more men who are involved, and I think that's tremendous. And many of whom you're connected with, you've had on your show, and I think that's really, really important. We need to continue to say these things. Be involved in your families. Be monogamous. Care for your, et cetera. School fit. So actually what I mean by that, and again, I don't know, I'm not yet too sure what the policy solution is. And a lot of the things I think that actually are the real solutions that are going to solve these root causes government has nothing to do with it. Government has nothing, civil society has everything to do with it. Mediating institutions like the church, Kiwanis Club, other community organizations, and important grass tops community leaders like pastors, sports coaches, the grandmothers. Those are the ones who are going to solve the problems, but they need to be united. They need to work in a concerted effort to do so. What I mean by school fit, and what I was writing, and I was really just talking about, why maybe, I took this different path from my brother who who didn't graduate from high school, or my sister who didn't graduate from high school, my brother who went to prison like our father did, or my sister who was raising as a single mother, as a single teenage mother, her son. How did I go a different direction here? And school fit, I think, was a part of it. What I mean by school fit is not necessarily what school choice advocates mean in terms of getting a better education. A better education is fantastic. If a kid gets a better education, that's terrific. What I mean by school fit is an environment in which that individual can excel as an individual. Not every school that you just get assigned to is the one that helps you to blossom, helps you to be the best you, right? Sometimes that's the Montessori school down the street that does a little different sort of education style than the local public school or one that you're zoned to or whatever, or the private school that you otherwise might be interested in sending your kid to or something like that. That one helps your individual child. It is designed for their sort of learning style. It's designed for their personality. It's designed for what they're good at, what they're interested in, and it's not just zip code based. If they get a great education as well, all the better. That's terrific. But we're talking about the vast majority of children that are educated in this country are not going to go to college. They're going to end up in the trades. They're going to be in the retail industry. There are all sorts of things like that, the military, et cetera. That's not college. What you want is that person to grow into the best person they can be. And that's what happened with me, just I think by sheer dumb luck. I did just go to, for the most part, the schools I was zoned to, public schools. I was identified early in my grade schooling days as being a gifted student. And this is another problem too. They're trying to get rid of gifted tracks and so on and so forth for students. And that's mostly problematic for Black and brown kids who come from bad neighborhoods, bad rough upbringing and so forth. But just by sheer dumb luck, I was put into environments that fit me well. I could excel there. Now, for a lot of kids, you're not going to just, again, it's dumb luck. It just so happened that way. Parents need to understand that even if they have twins, they can learn differently. And being in a different learning environment that helps each one of your individual children be their best selves is what we should be, I think, striving for when it comes to education. In part, or it's one of those things that certainly helped me to go a different direction than what the statistics might suggest I was headed towards, like my brother and my sister.
Yeah, you're giving me a lot to chew on there, especially when you talk about school fit versus school choice, because we are in this mindset that there's only one way to be educated. One way for everybody, one size fits all. And when you were talking, it reminded me of a TED Talk that I saw Colin Powell give. And I don't know how much you know about his background, but when he was younger, he was ratchet. Like, he was a bad kid. He was getting into all this stuff. I mean, he wasn't focused. He didn't know what he wanted to do. His parents were at their wits' end. And I think it was his mom. I think he was raised by his mom. I can't remember. But he just wasn't doing well at all. Then they put him in military school. And the moment he got into that military school, everything turned around. Everything turned around. And whether people like Colin Powell or not, I'm not talking about that. He became one of the most powerful men in the world because he was placed into an environment that allowed him to thrive. And it doesn't always have, it's not military school for everybody. It's not public school for everybody. I mean, you mentioned Montessori school. It might be a trade school. I mean, people go to trade schools. You open your own plumbing business. You may not have, it may be blue collar, but you might be making more money than doctors. You may be living in those nice neighborhoods. And we don't think of it that way because we're so locked into this mode of thinking. If you want to succeed, you got to go to college. You got to go to a regular university, whatever. Or if you get a scholarship, or if affirmative action gets you into MIT, you're going to make it. Like there's, again, it's a foregone conclusion. How do we break that mindset? Because it's destructive at this point.
First, I think we need to stop suggesting that college is for everybody. That has done great harm to more than a generation of people, many of them Black and brown people, who have thought that's the only way to pull themselves up to a higher station in life, particularly those who come from poor backgrounds. That's first. We did a fair amount of this in the Trump administration. I was at the Labor Department to help promote apprenticeships in the trades and so forth. And I think this is one of those things that is sort of a policy thing, or here's how government might help. And usually when I say government might help, I mean what I'm saying right now, and that is get out of the way, stop doing, stop helping us. Suggesting, and they've done this through official channels for years. I remember growing up and hearing PSAs and stuff about how important it is to go to college, and how kids are all, none of them are going to be left behind, and they're all going to be prepared for college and so forth. Stop saying that. It suggests that that's the only path to success, the only thing that's worthy of praise, and the only thing that you can really call real accomplishment. I talk about my brother and how he followed in my father's footsteps into prison, and made some bad decisions in that regard. I was just really kind of influenced by our circumstances. But now I'm very, very proud of him. He's doing very well for himself. Good. He's an electrician.
Nice.
He learned a trade. He left prison, got serious about his life, became an electrician. Now, we don't compare our W-2s or anything like that, but he's doing well, and he can start his own business if he wants.
It's okay to say it, Devon. He's balling now. It's all right.
Yeah, he's doing well, man. He's got more property than me. He's got several boats. He's got all these sorts of things and so forth. And if we can shine a light on those sorts of successes, I think that will also help to change this mindset within a lot of families around this country as well, a lot of communities. Everybody's going to go to college. College is for everybody, and everybody, that's the only way you can succeed. I think we can begin to change those mindsets by telling those stories, and to get government out of the way of continuing this damaging mantra that college is the only way. College is the only way. And you know what? Mm-hmm. Let's also just pay for college for everybody as well. But you're getting me down the wrong road there.
It kind of makes me wonder, like hearing your brother's story, it makes me wonder how many other people in that same position, Black, white, or otherwise, might not have gotten into the trouble they had gotten in if they had discovered the area where they would thrive in the first place. Like maybe if your brother had been introduced to being an electrician earlier, maybe it would, there's no way to know that, right? But it's just, it stands to reason that if more children are able to see where they thrive, rather than being funneled and forced into this one size fits all solution where some will thrive, but others won't, that we would have more people being successful. We'd see a huge difference. And if we're talking about like racial disparities, quote unquote, that sounds like a much better way to deal with the issue, rather than the government coming in and saying, all right, you got to hire this percentage of Black people, whether they're qualified or not. And even for the ones who are qualified and affirmative action helps them, they still have that albatross around their neck. Oh, you only got in here because of affirmative action. You didn't do it by your own merit. That has to be a crappy
get me started now.
Yeah, exactly. I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, allow me to say something about that. You asked in terms of affirmative action. Now we're getting back a little bit to affirmative action. Sort of the top sort of negative, the top problem. I mentioned two things. I could go on and on and on, and I have in various respects. So read my writing, look at my speeches and so forth. But one of those, what you just suggested, that because government has sanctioned race preferences for so long, and it's crept now sort of a little bit covertly into hiring, into promotions, contracting with the federal government, et cetera. Some of that is actually over. You'll just see it right there in the notice of grant making. You got to be BIPOC or something to be presumed to be underrepresented and to be able to get a benefit from your government, which is wild and my allies like to sue them, which is fantastic for that. But because the government has done this for so long a period of time, people have begun, rightly or wrongly, to presume that high-achieving Black people or brown people have gotten into schools, gotten jobs, promotions, etc., almost exclusively because of their skin color or because of who their ancestors are. That does major harm to race relations. I mean, people, it's unfair. It's patently unfair. And so you should feel, that it's unfair. If you're someone who just, by happenstance, is not Black or Hispanic or whatever, and especially if you're Asian American these days, and this is being challenged at Harvard and UNC, the race conscious admissions policies, or Asians are really pushed down, despite the fact that they have the academic credentials on average, by and large, to be admitted to these institutions, because there are too many of them on campus. But you're demeaned because of this, whether you were admitted in part through some race preferences scheme or not. You're demeaned as a diversity admit to school. People see you as a diversity hire, a diversity promotion. There's no reason that you should have been put on this corporate board, other than the fact that California demands that a woman, has to be, or a minority has to be on it, or, you're a man, you sleep with men, and they had a spot for you. That's the only reason why you made it. It's unfair to those people, and understand why they would think that and demean Black and brown people, or have the thought that they're diversity admits and diversity hires and so forth. But it also lives with, through no fault of your own, except for being born a minority in this country, it lives with high-achieving Black people all their lives. There's an asterisk on their resumes and their achievements, suggesting, they didn't do it on their own.
Yeah, the affirmative action asterisk. Yeah,
that is a scandal.
Yeah.
So I mentioned at the top, I graduated from University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. It's one of the schools that's being challenged right now at the Supreme Court. Supreme Court has accepted a case challenging their race-conscious admissions policies. I live for the rest of my life, I guess I'm high-achieving academically and so forth. I live with, for the rest of my life, an asterisk on my resume from this school that's actually being challenged based on the race-conscious admission scheme as potentially a diversity admit. I've got a degree from that school. As a Black man, is that fair to me? For the rest of my life, not knowing, and they don't tell you whether race had some influence or perhaps some outsized influence on why they selected you to go to the school. I have to live with that for the rest of my life. Other high-achieving Black people, or anyone who achieves something that is influenced by race preferences, has to live with the rest of their life the fact that it might not have been because you were the best candidate. They needed to fill a sort of a quota. They were trying to balance their racial classes or something like that. It's not fair.
Well, yeah, it's not fair. It's sad. And it goes back to what you were saying at the beginning when you were talking about the stereotypes of Black people being lazy or not intelligent or whatever. Like, this even further entrenches that. Like, and a lot of these people who promote this will say that they have a problem with those stereotypes, but you're pushing something that just reinforces that. Because if you're saying that you're going to push an initiative that causes people to think that the exceptions, again, quotations, of Black people who managed to succeed in, like, do what you did, for instance, that it was only because the government intervened because they forced people to choose them based on his race and nothing else, then that stereotype is still reinforced. It's just, when the deeper you get on this affirmative action stuff, the worse it gets, just from what I'm saying.
Here's one of the biggest things too, is that nobody, well, your listeners are going to be lucky enough to hear this conversation. So nobody's saying these things. You never hear these things. I was talking to, it was my wife or friend recently. I can't remember exactly. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I tease out some of my ideas just by talking with others who are smart and interested and these sorts of things. But when I was growing up, I'm thinking about launching a new project and organization. When I was growing up, there was no, first of all, we didn't know about affirmative action. We didn't even know about HBCUs. We were all poor. Nobody went to college or anything like that. Yeah. But nothing penetrated the community that was different than the narrative that we were supposed to believe and be told. And everybody got their source of information about national politics or what have you from very small source. And it was always a left source. One of the best things that we can do is exactly what you do, what I try to do, is to penetrate that bubble and have these conversations. Just say, there are other thoughts out there. There are other ideas about these things. And I think if folks just had an opportunity to get that, they would not necessarily agree with anything that I'm saying, but they would be better informed. They would be thinking about how we addressed some of these issues in a more sophisticated way than, you've got a certain skin color, so you get in, or whatever, and understand that there are unintended consequences of some of, many of these ideas. And if we're not honest and open about talking about them from a wide variety of perspectives, we really are not doing any good. One of the problems is that there are a lot of people becoming fabulously wealthy and powerful and keeping any sort of counter narrative or different ideas out of these.
Yes.
It's tragic.
And that brings me to my last question, because I have a quote from you in your op-ed, and you said, quote, "Finally, when a child is the victim of intergenerational poverty, as I was, their world is very small. Theoretically, there is more out there, but practically there only exists their block, street, or neighborhood." That reminds me of a conversation I had with Canon Hotep. It's on my channel. And he's in Baltimore, and he was born and raised there. And he would tell me that a lot of his friends in the hood had never even been outside the city. He told me a story of one case where he had one of his friends, and he wanted to drive him out of Baltimore to go somewhere else. And when they started getting to the border, his friend wanted to go back. And to me, that is so foreign from the way I was raised. I was very fortunate. I've been all across the country. I've been to other countries. My mom was able to do very, very well for me. And when I heard that, I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And so going back to what you said before about social media, do you see that as the way to kind of penetrate that bubble? Because like you said, there are people who are very interested in making sure that people don't hear other ideas, especially in these cities. Do you see that as maybe the answer, or maybe the avenue through which ideas like what you just articulated could maybe get through?
You're not going to
like it. Or maybe there's other ways?
You're not going to like this. I don't think that's it. We develop, I think it's well known at this point, social media, we develop echo chambers. We only hear what we want to hear. We follow those people who are already saying things that we agree with, or that we believe we're going to agree with, and so forth. And as soon as they say something we don't like, we unfollow. We find someone to create
that block button.
To create that bubble. I'm not saying it's not helping. I definitely think that it is. And if someone wants to seek out information that they haven't heard before, they can. That's really, really important. I think that's good. I mentioned a part of this earlier, and I think it really has to happen organically within the community. And I was suggesting I'm interested in potentially starting this new project that's a bit more grassroots than my organization's ever done before. But I think it's critically important that people within the community have to say these things to other people in the community. You have to have some sort of cachet already in the community. I can't go around this country and go talk to some, church congregation in Birmingham or something like that about affirmative action this way and have the same impact on people. Now, I can get those ideas into the community, but it has to be espoused by someone who's there, who's respected. I suggested the grass tops, the grandmothers, the ball coaches, the church leaders, and other people who people go to for their information on things. And in every community across this country, white, black, yellow, purple, Chicano, whatever, there are people who if they don't agree with the sort of things that we've been talking about, or my views on these matters, are at least willing to engage with them and potentially share them with their communities, because they care about their communities and their communities care what they have to say. If we can mobilize those people to just go and talk about some of this stuff, I think that would be the most powerful thing that we could do. And just an army of grassroots, grass tops, whatever, people who are in their own communities talking about these things that never penetrate the community, these ideas that never get there, that otherwise would really help people to expand their minds on what's out there, that there's actually more to the world, more to our American experiment here, more that we can do to successfully ensure that every American has the equal opportunity that we promise in this country under the law, and that they achieve their individual potential, without suggesting that they're always going to be brought down and never going to be able to do that for one reason or another, which is the narrative that's in a lot of these, particularly as I suggest in the piece, these communities of intergenerational poverty. That also means poor Appalachian whites, who these ideas don't penetrate those communities and help them to get out of the cycle that they are in. So that's what. It's always a harder fix than I wish it could be. But if we're being honest, we got to talk about what it is and start getting committed to doing those things. If we're going to be serious at all, if we really do care, if we're really honest that we want to affect change.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it comes down to, right? I mean, are we going to go with a Band-Aid that isn't really a Band-Aid? Or are we going to dig in and do the work? I mean, I think what you said, I think that probably is the way to affect change. But if you're doing that, you got to be willing to do the work and recognize that it's going to be a long-term fix. I mean, it took a while to get to this point. It's going to take a while to get out of it. But I think that we do have the tools to do it. So, I mean, we could probably go on and on about this. So we got to do this again. Yeah. but before we sign off, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you?
Yeah, thanks. So the organization that I run is called the Center for Equal Opportunity. We have a website. It's ceousa.org. I'm on Twitter now, for good or for ill, as I suggested.
Watch out.
At Devon Westhill. I'm Devon, the only proper way to spell Devon. At Devon Westhill. And I have LinkedIn. I'm happy to link in with people too if that's more your bag. So that's where.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining the program. I'm looking forward to next time.
Thank you, Jeff.
Let me end this real quick.